Hello, I'm Lydia, and this is Chiaroscuro. This is the follow-up video for the portrait that I did way too long ago. It's been too long. A portrait of two brothers from the time of the reign of Charles I. And it was really interesting to see how the artist, who's Anthony Van Dyck, I almost said Dick Van Dyke, but he's an actor. Anthony Van Dyck portrayed these two different brothers who, from my research, I actually found had very different characters. So, without further ado, let's take a closer look at the portrait of Sir John Stuart and his brother, Sir Bernard Stuart, by Anthony Van Dyck. Artist first, as always, Anthony Van Dyck is one of the great masters of the 17th century. He was a Flemish artist, which makes him from Flemland. No, not at all. That makes him from Flanders, which is in modern-day Belgium. And he studied in England and Italy, became a master, and then painted in the Antwerp Painters Guild. Van Dyck eventually became the official painter of the English royal court, which means he painted people and scenes associated with the English monarchy. And at that time, this was the Stuarts, who were also rulers of Scotland and a whole bunch of other places around the British Isles. He painted loads of aristocrats and was eventually given a knighthood by Charles I. Moving on to the young men in the portrait, Lord John Stuart and his brother Bernard Stuart. Now, I was right in my guess that the one in gold is older and the one in silver is younger. But I was also right that the younger one was more ambitious / warlike. This painting was painted around 1638 when the boys were teenagers. Should I call them boys? I mean, they're teenagers, 16 and 17, but they look and kind of hold themselves more like young men. Maybe I'll just go with youths. Now, technically, they were Scottish nobles, but at this time, England, Scotland, and Ireland were being ruled by the Stuarts, as I said before. And then the English Civil War happens, which is essentially the Royalists, who are called the Cavaliers, versus the Parliamentarians, who are called the Roundheads, so the people who wanted the king in charge and the people who wanted the Parliament in charge and wanted to get rid of the king entirely and the monarchy entirely. Now, the Parliamentarians eventually threw out temporarily the monarchy, and Ollie Cromwell was not jolly. I think that joke has been made before. He's the guy who outlawed sports and Christmas and happiness in general. But these beautiful these beautiful youths never saw Cromwell's triumph. They died 2 or 3 years into the first round of wars, when they were in their very early 20s. Bernard served as a royalist commander in this civil war, and he fought with great distinction, apparently, in the first and second battles of Newbury and the Battle of Naseby, before dying from injuries received when leading a sortie against the Roundheads in the Battle of Rowton Heath, which was in September 1645. He was 22 years old at this point when he died. Nevertheless, he was already known for being very bold and courageous and leading his men valiantly. Now, John, although he was older, he was not at all like his brother, apparently. Although he did serve in the wars, it seems he did absolutely nothing to distinguish himself. At least, that's what I deduce from the research that I had done, which turned up pretty much nothing on the internet. And of course, as we all know, if it's not on the internet, it never happened. Now, John was killed in the Battle of Cheriton near Ellisford, which is in Essex, and he died in 1644, so a year before his younger brother. This is where some of the really interesting stuff in regards to the portrait comes in. The painting was painted when the boys were in their teens, so it was far before they had shown any distinction in battle, far before they had any experiences of that kind to really show their character. And yet somehow Van Dyck saw what was already there and was able to put it into his painting. So how did he show that Bernard was this bold warrior, whereas John was kind of useless, at least when it comes to war? Now Bernard, who's again this guy over here, clearly is a bit more of a dashing figure in the portrait. He is in motion. He is stepping onto the step. He is tossing his cape thingy over his shoulder. His hand is on his hips, right? He's moving. He is also dashing in the sense of being very, very handsome, or at least according to the standards of those times. He has these beautiful curly locks. He looks very strong and powerful, and that has to do with actually his stance, not just the motion that he is going through, but the position of his body, his attitude. And he is turning to look at us, which is with a rather daring gaze. See those crinkled eyes? I bet he is thinking something like, "You can't do what I'm going to do, ha ha ha. Well, Bernard, you don't know me, don't tell me what I can't do." It's more than just his gaze, though. It's more than his eyes. His very presence has an implication of power, which is something that people have been trying since the beginning of art itself. First, look at his stance. Yes, you have one foot on the step, but that actually makes his stance stronger. It has that triangle pose that is very, very sturdy. And this is something that the ancient Egyptians actually used in their statues of kings and deities. Not the step itself, but this sort of 1 foot forward triangular pose. It's strong. Now, something a little bit more modern is that he actually has his back turned. This is kind of that uncaring confidence that says, "You are so little of a threat to me that I can turn my back on you." And I see it a lot in the power posing of CEOs who like to stand with their backs to the door, gazing out of the window at the magnificent view of their city. Or at least I see it in movies and TV shows. But even this hand on the hip is a sign of power, and Wonder Woman does this, is really known for doing this. And she has that wide stance and straight back as well. So this idea of making yourself solid and projecting an image of power is kind of what he's doing. So Bernard's stance and his gaze are exuding authority, but Dick Van Dyke draws this prominence out even further by painting him in blue and silver. Now, when I first looked at this, I thought, silver, well, that's a secondary color. You know, gold is usually more important. But having looked at it and thought about this painting for far too many weeks, I realized that the blue and silver contrasts more with the background and makes the younger son, despite it being fairly obvious that he's the younger one, it makes him stand out more. Plus, he has a sword, and it's kind of a subtle sword, and he's not even touching it. But at this point, he does not really need to touch it to demonstrate his prominence. He has all of the courtly swagger, like, ever. So if we move on then to John. John seems to be completely the opposite of his brother in every way. His stance looks narrow. It might not have been narrow in reality, but it looks narrow, and in a painting, that's really the most important thing. His colors are muted, his hair is straight, and he is weaponless, as far as we can tell. And I also find it interesting, I find it interesting that we can only see one hand. So while there is an air of power surrounding Bernard, there is an air of dreaminess surrounding John. While John's colors and stance make him less prominent than his brother, this air that he has is also quite stirring in its own way. His pose has him more or less facing us, and everything about him from his straight back to his visible hand are both very upright and very relaxed, almost as though he is inviting us to get closer. But his head is turned slightly away, the 3/4 view, and whereas his brother is looking at us, he is gazing away into the dreamy far-off distances. So while Bernard both draws people close and keeps them from getting too close by a display of power, John does the same thing by being open, inviting, and not fully present. And this is why portraiture is more than just making a reasonable facsimile of someone. These are the kinds of tricks that show character, not just physical likeness. But that then also brings up an interesting conundrum. Who poses these portraits? Did Van Dyck pose the brothers? Or did they do it themselves? And how intentionally were these poses picked? I think I can say that the clothes were probably chosen by the muse, or perhaps by their mother. But the background and the vibrancy or dullness of the colors were probably done at the hand of the artist. So in portraits, how much does the artist create and how much does the person being portrayed influence? Does the artist need to have a good understanding of the sitter's personality in order to give a good likeness? In paintings like this, where we seem to get a glimpse not only of the person's likeness, but their psyche, is it actually an accurate glimpse? I'm not sure if these questions can actually be answered, but I would love to hear your thoughts, especially if you are a portraitist or if you have ever sat for a portrait. And of course, photography gives a whole new wrinkle to this question, as do selfies. And I'm going to end there with that thought, because if I go any further down that rabbit hole, I think it's going to get very dark and scary. Alright, I will see you all someplace else. Bye!